Welcome to one of the most emotional stories you'll ever hear. This is not just about love. It's about what happens when love turns into survival. If you've ever believed in fairy tales or thought love could fix anything, this story will make you question everything you know. Because this is the journey of Emily, a woman who found her dream man, lived her perfect life, and then watched it all slowly fall apart. So sit back, listen closely, and stay until the end, because what Emily discovered about love, heartbreak, and strength might just change the way you see relationships forever. Let's begin Chapter 1. Chapter 1. The Promise of Forever. They said love could fix anything. And for Emily, that belief wasn't just a dream, it was her whole reason for living. From the outside, her story began like something out of a movie. A warm evening 3 years ago, fairy lights strung across a wedding garden, laughter drifting through the air. That's where she first saw Ryan, tall, charming, confident, the kind of man whose smile could light up a room. When their eyes met across the crowd, it felt as if the world around her disappeared. He walked up to her with quiet certainty and said the kind of line that should have sounded rehearsed, but somehow didn't. "Hi, I'm Ryan, and I think you're the most beautiful woman here tonight." Emily laughed nervously, not because she didn't believe him, but because no one had ever said something like that to her before. They talked for hours that night, about music, childhood dreams, and silly little things that didn't matter, yet somehow did. When the last song played, they danced under the lights, her heart racing like it already knew this moment would change everything. In the weeks that followed, Ryan became the center of her world. He sent flowers for no reason. He wrote her small notes and left them on her car. He'd show up unannounced with coffee just to see her smile. Every gesture felt effortless, the kind of love story she thought only existed in novels. One evening, a year later, he took her to the beach at sunset. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold as the waves rolled softly against the shore. Ryan dropped to one knee, holding out a small velvet box, his voice trembling with emotion. "Emily," he said, "you're the love of my life. I can't imagine a single day without you. Will you marry me?" She said yes through tears, laughter, and the sound of waves crashing behind them. In that moment, forever didn't just feel possible, it felt guaranteed. Their wedding was everything she'd dreamed of. White lace, fairy lights, and the song Perfect by Ed Sheeran playing as they shared their first dance. Ryan held her close and whispered, "I'll love you forever, Emily." And she believed him, every word. Their first few months together were magical, laughter-filled evenings, lazy Sunday mornings, and whispered plans for the future. To anyone watching, they were proof that true love still existed. But behind the gentle smiles and warm embraces, something else was quietly forming, something neither of them could see coming, because the man who promised forever was about to become a stranger, and Emily's fairy tale was about to turn into something she would never forget. Chapter 2. The Cracks in the Dream. It didn't snap all at once. It bent, quietly. At first, Emily blamed the long days at Ryan's office. Deadlines, new clients, a boss who never slept. He started coming home late with a tight smile and a looser temper. In his eyes dimmed, like a light bulb slowly losing power. Dinner went cold a few times. Conversations shortened to nods. She told herself every couple goes through this. Seasons change, people get tired. But then the little things stopped being little. One evening, she set his plate down a minute later than usual. The fork clattered too hard against the table as he picked it up. "It's fine," he said, but his jaw stayed locked the whole meal. Another night she asked gently, "Rough day?" And his answer came out sharper than she'd ever heard. "Why do you need to know every detail?" The question hung in the room like smoke. She apologized, though she wasn't sure for what, and he stared past her as if speaking to someone else entirely. The silence changed shape, too. It wasn't restful anymore. It pressed on the walls, crowded the hallway, followed them from room to room. Emily started tiptoeing around the edges of conversations, careful not to wake whatever this was. She measured her words like they were breakable glass. When he laughed, it sounded a second too late. When he smiled, it didn't reach his eyes. Sleep, once their softest ritual, turned brittle. She woke to find him sitting upright in the dark, hands folded, gaze fixed on a corner of the room where there was nothing to see. "Can't sleep?" she whispered. He didn't answer. She reached for his arm. He flinched, not away from her, but toward something she couldn't feel. By morning he'd be in the kitchen making coffee, acting as if night never happened. The first outburst came on a Tuesday. A glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the tile. He went red in an instant, a flash of anger so sudden she forgot to breathe. "Do you ever pay attention?" The words weren't loud, but they were heavy. They landed in her chest and stayed there. She cleaned up the shards while he walked out, and when he came back hours later, he kissed her forehead like nothing had happened. That confused her more than the anger did. The words weren't loud, but they were heavy. They landed in her chest and stayed there. She cleaned up the shards while he walked out, and when he came back hours later, he kissed her forehead like nothing had happened. That confused her more than the anger did. She began keeping small notes in her phone, not evidence, just anchors. Monday, pacing at 3 a.m. Wednesday, said he felt watched. Friday, apologized for something he never said. She didn't show them to anyone. She wasn't even sure why she wrote them down. But it made her feel less alone to see the dates and times lined up, the pattern forming in plain text. There were good days, too. He'd surprise her with a sketch of the beach where he proposed, a little crooked heart drawn in the sand. They'd share a quiet meal, and it felt like the man she married was right there, breathing beside her, holding the same future. Those days kept her believing they could find their way back. But the in-betweens grew stranger. Once she found him on the back steps, staring at the tree line, lips moving with no sound. When she asked who he was talking to, he looked startled, as if caught, and smiled too quickly. Just thinking out loud. The smile vanished almost immediately, like a curtain dropping mid-scene. Another evening, he locked the bathroom door and ran the shower without getting in. Steam curled under the frame for nearly an hour. When he came out, his hands shook as he dried them, though they hadn't been wet. She tried to meet his eyes. He looked past her again, above her, really, as if tracking something that drifted across the ceiling. Emily kept telling herself there had to be a reason. Stress, burnout, anything with a name she could look up and fix. She asked if he wanted to take a weekend away, just the two of them, phones off. He said maybe. He said he'd check his schedule. He said a lot of things that didn't happen. The night the mirror broke, she was already bracing. A crash split the quiet, the kind of sound you feel in your teeth. She ran into the living room and found shards across the rug, glittering like frost. Ryan stood over them with his fists curled, blood bright on his knuckles. His chest rose and fell too fast. For a heartbeat, he looked like a man waking from a nightmare he couldn't describe. "They won't stop," he whispered, and the way he said it made the room colder. Not loud, not angry, just hollow. "Who won't stop?" she asked. He blinked hard, as if forcing a thought back behind his eyes. "Nothing. I'm fine." But the word fine broke just like the mirror had. 1,000 glittering pieces and no reflection she recognized. That night, Emily lay awake listening to the house breathe. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Outside, a dog barked twice and went quiet. Beside her, Ryan turned over and muttered something she couldn't catch, a name she'd never heard him say. She stared at the ceiling, tracing invisible constellations, trying to draw a line from the man on the beach who promised forever, to the stranger lying inches away. She didn't find the line. By morning, the sun lit up the tiny cuts on his knuckles like little warnings. He kissed her temple and told her not to worry. She smiled back because she didn't know what else to do. But worry doesn't ask for permission. It lives in the pauses. It grows in the places where answers should be. And that evening, when Emily woke in the dark to an empty bed and a faint creak above her, she realized the story was about to step past discomfort and into danger, because the next place she found him wasn't in the house at all. Chapter 3. Whispers in the dark. The wind outside carried the faint hum of the city, but inside everything felt still, too still. Emily's heart pounded as she stepped out of bed, the floor cold beneath her bare feet. The faint creak she'd heard moments ago came again, this time from above. For a second, she thought she imagined it, but then she saw it. The soft glow of moonlight spilling down from the open hatch to the roof. Her stomach turned. Ryan was up there. She climbed the narrow steps, calling his name softly, afraid of what she might find. Ryan? What are you doing up there? When she reached the top, the air hit her, cool, sharp, almost electric. Ryan stood barefoot on the edge of the roof, staring into the night sky. His hair was wild, his breathing uneven. The city lights reflected in his eyes, making them look almost glassy. Ryan, she whispered again, afraid to startle him. Please, come down. He didn't move. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something far away. Do you hear them, Emily? He said quietly. They're talking again. Her voice trembled. Who's talking? The voices, he said, and his tone was matter-of-fact, calm in a way that made it worse. They don't stop. They keep telling me things. About you. About us. Emily froze. The wind tugged at her hair, but all she could feel was the weight of those words. Voices. Talking. About her. She took a cautious step forward, her voice soft. Ryan, there's no one here but us. Please, come inside. It's cold. We can talk, okay? For a moment he seemed to hear her. Really hear her. His shoulders lowered, the wildness in his eyes softened. He nodded, just once, and followed her back down. Inside, he sat on the couch, trembling slightly as he wrapped his arms around himself. She brought him tea, her hand shaking too much to pour without spilling. When he finally spoke again, his voice cracked. I'm sorry, Emily. I don't know what's happening to me. I can't tell what's real anymore. She wanted to believe it was stress, exhaustion, anything but what it sounded like. It's okay, she whispered, even though it wasn't. We'll figure it out together. For a few days, things seemed almost normal again. Ryan acted as if the rooftop night never happened. He kissed her cheek before work, made jokes at dinner, even brought her flowers. Emily tried to convince herself it was just a bad episode, something that would pass. But it didn't. Soon, the voices returned. The sleepless nights did too. She'd find him sitting in the dark, murmuring under his breath. Sometimes he'd stop mid-sentence and stare into nothing, as if seeing someone behind her. She started avoiding mirrors, afraid to see her own fear reflected. Then, one night, she woke to find the front door open. The wind blew the curtains inward, and Ryan was nowhere in sight. She ran outside in her robe, calling his name down the quiet street. When she finally found him, he was standing in the middle of the road, barefoot again, whispering something to the empty air. She grabbed his arm. Ryan, please, you're scaring me. He turned to her slowly. His expression was blank, his voice distant. They told me you'd try to stop me. Her blood ran cold. Who did? But he didn't answer. Instead, he looked past her, eyes locked on something that wasn't there, and then suddenly collapsed, like the life had drained from him all at once. Emily screamed his name, shaking him, until finally he opened his eyes again, dazed and trembling. She helped him back inside, tears streaking down her face. Ryan, you need help, she said, her voice breaking. This isn't just stress. Something's wrong. Please let me call someone. He looked at her for a long moment, then gave her a small, broken smile. "I don't need help," he whispered. "I just need the noise to stop." That night, Emily didn't sleep. She sat awake beside him, listening to the sound of his shallow breathing, wondering how the man she loved could look so alive and yet so lost at the same time. By morning, she made a decision. She couldn't do this alone. She needed answers, and she knew there was only one person who might have them. The next day, with trembling hands and a heart heavy with dread, Emily picked up the phone and called Ryan's sister, Rachel. What Rachel told her would change everything she thought she knew about the man she married. Chapter 4. The Secret He Kept. The call connected on the third ring. "Hey, Emily," Rachel said, her voice soft but cautious, like she already sensed this wasn't just a friendly chat. "Rachel," Emily began, her throat tight, "I think something's wrong with Ryan." There was silence on the other end, the kind of silence that says more than words ever could. Emily continued, her voice trembling. "He's been hearing things, talking to himself. Sometimes he gets angry over nothing and then it's like he isn't even there anymore." For a few seconds, Rachel didn't respond. Then she sighed, long and deep. "Emily," she said finally, "there's something you need to know." Emily gripped the phone tighter, her pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" "When Ryan was in his early 20s, Rachel began carefully, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. It was bad for a while. Paranoia, hallucinations, breakdowns. But after years of therapy and medication, he started to stabilize. He was doing really well. Emily's heart dropped. Schizophrenia. The word echoed in her mind, sharp and heavy. "He never told me," she whispered. Rachel hesitated. "He didn't want to. He thought if you knew, you might not want to marry him. He stopped taking his meds a few months before your wedding, said he didn't need them anymore. He thought he was cured." Emily felt the world tilt beneath her. Images flooded her mind. The rooftop, the whispers, the broken mirror, the sleepless nights. All the pieces that hadn't made sense suddenly formed a picture she didn't want to see. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" she whispered, voice cracking. "Because he made us promise," Rachel said softly. "He didn't want you to see that side of him. He wanted a fresh start." Emily pressed her hand against her forehead, trying to steady her breathing. "I could have helped him," she said, tears spilling down her face. "If I'd known, I could have done something." "Emily," Rachel interrupted gently, "none of this is your fault." But Emily barely heard her. Her mind was spinning, replaying every moment, every flash of anger, every sleepless night, every strange word. It wasn't just stress. It wasn't burnout. It was something deeper, something that had been hiding behind his smile. After the call, she sat in silence for a long time, staring at the wedding photo on the wall. Ryan's smile looked so genuine. She remembered how safe she'd felt that day, how certain she was that he'd never hurt her. Now, she wasn't so sure. When Ryan came home that evening, she could tell he sensed something had changed. "You talked to Rachel," he said quietly, not asking, stating. Emily nodded. "She told me." His jaw tightened. "I told her not to say anything." "You should have told me, Ryan," she said, tears in her voice. "You let me think I was losing my mind. You let me believe this was my fault." He looked at her then, really looked, and in his eyes she saw fear, not anger, not shame, just fear. "I didn't want you to see me like that," he said, voice breaking. "I thought I could handle it. I thought if I pretended hard enough, I could be normal for you." Emily's heart broke in 1,000 directions at once. She wanted to hold him, to tell him it was okay. But another part of her, the part that had spent weeks walking on eggshells, the part that had woken up in the dark to an empty bed, wanted to scream. Instead, she took his hands and said softly, "You don't have to handle it alone anymore. But you do need help. Real help." Ryan didn't answer. His eyes darted to the window, unfocused. "They'll think I'm crazy again," he whispered. "No," she said firmly. "They'll think you're strong for trying to get better." For a long moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then, finally, he nodded. The next week was a blur of doctor appointments, prescriptions, and quiet tears. The psychiatrist confirmed what Rachel had said. Ryan's schizophrenia had relapsed. He needed to go back on medication and into therapy. Emily tried to be hopeful. She told herself that now that they knew what they were facing, things could get better. They had a plan. They had support. And for a while, they did. Ryan started taking his meds again. The voices faded, the anger softened, and Emily caught glimpses of the man she'd fallen in love with. They went for walks, watched sunsets, even laughed again. But deep down, Emily knew. The peace was fragile. Like a glass sculpture balanced on a table that could shake at any moment. Because while the medicine silenced the voices, it also dimmed something else in Ryan. His spark, his joy, the light in his eyes. And slowly, painfully, that silence began to eat at him. Chapter 5. The Weight of Love. The first few weeks after Ryan started treatment felt almost like a fragile sunrise after a long, endless night. The shadows were still there, but at least there was light again. He smiled more. He laughed sometimes. And for a while, Emily dared to believe they were finding their way back. They went for walks by the lake, where he used to sketch the ripples in the water. They talked about dreams again, traveling, maybe adopting a dog. But it wasn't the same. Something in him had changed. Ryan began to move slower, his words softer, his gaze unfocused. The medication made him feel distant, dulled, as if part of him had been locked behind a glass wall. He once said, "It's quiet now, but it's too quiet." Emily didn't know what to say. She wanted to celebrate that the voices were gone, but how could she when the man she loved looked like a ghost of himself? He'd sit on the porch for hours, staring at nothing. When she asked what he was thinking, he'd shrug and mumble, "Just trying to remember what happy felt like." That sentence haunted her. Emily tried to fill the silence with small acts of love, cooking his favorite meals, leaving notes on his desk, playing their song when he seemed far away. Sometimes it worked. He'd smile faintly and say, "You always know how to find me." But other times, he'd look at her like she was a stranger. The hardest part wasn't the anger anymore. It was the emptiness. There were nights he'd sit on the edge of the bed, eyes open but somewhere else entirely. When she reached for his hand, he wouldn't pull away, but he wouldn't hold on either. It was like loving someone underwater. Everything felt slowed, distant, unreachable. The doctor said it was part of the adjustment. "Give it time," they said. "The mind heals slowly." So she gave it time. Weeks became months. She learned the rhythm of his moods, the quiet mornings, the restless evenings, the sudden tears he couldn't explain. She held him through the shaking nights when he whispered that he didn't feel real anymore. "I'm right here," she'd tell him over and over, even when her voice broke. "You're not alone." And for a moment, he'd look at her like he almost believed it. But the cracks began to return. Not with violence this time, with despair. He started skipping doses, saying the pills made him feel like a shadow. "I can't live like this, Emily," he said one night, voice trembling. "I feel trapped inside my own head." She tried to reason with him. "It's the medicine keeping you safe. It's what helps you get better." He laughed, a sound too sharp to be joy. "Better? You call this better? I can't even think straight. I can't draw. I can't feel anything." The words hit her harder than he knew, because deep down she understood what he meant. He wasn't wrong. He had lost something. The sparkle, the creativity, the ease that once defined him. But what choice did they have? She tried everything, new routines, therapy sessions, gentle encouragement. But every time he slipped, it took more out of her to pull him back. It was like holding someone who was slowly drifting away, and no matter how tightly she held on, the distance kept growing. One evening, they went to the park where they'd once had picnics. The sunset was golden, the kind of light that makes everything look softer. Ryan seemed quiet, calm even. He reached into his bag and pulled out a sketch pad. He handed her a drawing. It was them, sitting on that same park bench, but this time the version of him in the sketch was fading, half erased. Tears filled her eyes. "Ryan, why did you draw this?" He looked at her with a kind of tired love. "Because that's how it feels," he said simply. "Like I'm disappearing, and I don't know how to stop it." That night, Emily sat alone after he'd gone to bed, the sketch trembling in her hands. She wanted to save him. God, she wanted to. But how do you fight something you can't see? Days turned into a blur of small battles, missed pills, broken promises, tears followed by apologies. Ryan's moods swung like a pendulum between quiet affection and unbearable frustration. He'd hold her one moment and shout the next, then crumble in guilt. Emily stopped counting how many times she cried in the shower. But through it all, she stayed. Because love, she thought, was about staying, even when it hurts. Until one day, she looked in the mirror and realized she didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were tired, her shoulders tense, her smile gone. She wasn't the Emily who danced barefoot on the beach or believed forever was simple. She was someone who had given everything and had nothing left to give. Still, every morning, she woke up, made breakfast, and whispered the same 3 words. "We'll get through this." But even as she said them, a quiet voice inside her was starting to whisper something else. What if we don't? Chapter 6. The breaking point. It didn't happen overnight. The unraveling came slowly, so quietly at first that Emily barely noticed when love turned into survival. Chapter 6. The breaking point. It didn't happen overnight. The unraveling came slowly, so quietly at first that Emily barely noticed when love turned into survival. And she did. That was the cruelest part. She loved him so deeply that leaving felt unthinkable, like cutting off a part of herself. But love had begun to hurt. One night, he threw a glass against the wall. It shattered just inches from her head. The sound froze her where she stood, her breath caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. Ryan's face went pale instantly. "Emily, no!" He rushed toward her, trembling. "I didn't mean to." She stepped back, tears blurring her vision. "You scared me." That was the first time she admitted it out loud. And once she did, she couldn't take it back. He broke down, sobbing into his hands, and she held him. Not because she forgave him yet, but because she couldn't stand to see him crumble. She told herself it was the illness talking, not the man she married. But the line between the two had become impossible to see. After that night, the air between them changed. The laughter was gone. The warmth was gone. Even their silences felt different now, not peaceful, but charged, fragile, waiting for the next spark to ignite. Emily found herself watching him constantly, searching for signs. Was today a good day or a bad one? Would he be quiet or angry? Would he remember to take his meds, or would she have to beg him again? It was exhausting, mentally, physically, emotionally. And still, she stayed. Until one evening, everything inside her finally broke. They were arguing about nothing, about dinner or maybe the mail, she couldn't even remember. Ryan slammed his fist on the table so hard the salt shaker jumped. "Why do you always make me feel like I'm not enough?" he shouted. His words cut deeper than he knew. Emily's voice trembled. Ryan, I'm trying to help you. But you keep shutting me out. I don't need your help, he snapped. I just need you to stop controlling me. Controlling him. The irony hit her like a wave. For years, she'd been holding his world together, managing appointments, talking to doctors, soothing the storms. And now, she was the villain in his mind. Her hands were shaking. I'm just trying to keep us safe, Ryan. But her words only seemed to push him further away. He stormed out, the door slamming so hard the walls shook. Emily collapsed onto the kitchen floor and cried until her throat burned. That night, she didn't chase after him. She didn't call or text. She just sat there, staring at the cracked glass on the table, feeling something inside her finally go quiet. When he came home hours later, he didn't speak. He walked past her, eyes red, and went straight to bed. The next morning, they acted like nothing had happened, but deep down, they both knew something had changed forever. The next few days were heavy with silence. Emily moved through the house like a ghost, cleaning dishes, folding clothes, pretending this was still her life. But it wasn't. Not anymore. She realized she wasn't living with the man she loved. She was living with the memory of who he used to be, and memories couldn't love her back. That afternoon, she drove to her parents' house. Her mother took one look at her and said softly, "You look tired, sweetheart." Emily broke down in her arms. "I can't do it anymore," she whispered. "I love him, but I'm breaking." Her mother stroked her hair gently. "Love shouldn't destroy you, Emily. You've done everything you can, but you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved." The words hit deep, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. That night, Emily sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her wedding ring. She remembered the beach, the laughter, the way Ryan looked at her when he said forever. She thought about all the times she'd whispered to herself, "We'll get through this." But this time she whispered something else. "I have to let go." She wrote him a letter, not of anger, but of love. She told him she would always care for him, but she couldn't keep drowning to save him. That he needed to fight for himself now, that she hoped one day he'd understand. When Ryan came home that night, she was already packed. He froze in the doorway, eyes wide. "Where are you going?" Her voice broke. "Home." "You are home," he said, his voice cracking. She shook her head slowly. "Not anymore." He begged, he cried, he promised he would change. But she had heard those words before, and this time she didn't believe them. "I'm not leaving because I stopped loving you," she said softly. "I'm leaving because I finally love myself enough to know I deserve peace." And with that, she walked out, closing the door on the only life she had known for years. Outside, the night air felt colder than she expected, but lighter somehow. She got in her car, started the engine, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't look back. Chapter 7. The road back to herself. The first morning after Emily left, the silence was deafening. No slamming doors, no hurried footsteps, no tense pauses waiting for the next outburst. Just silence, pure and heavy. She woke up in her old bedroom at her parents' house, sunlight spilling across the floral curtains she hadn't seen in years. For the first time in forever, she didn't have to tiptoe around someone else's moods. She didn't have to brace herself for what the day might bring. But freedom didn't feel like joy. It felt like grief. Emily cried, not just for what she'd lost, but for what she'd given. The years she'd spent trying to hold everything together. The woman she used to be before the fear and exhaustion took over. For days, she barely spoke. She slept a lot, ate little, moved through the house like someone learning how to live again. Her mother would knock gently on the door each morning, leave tea by the bedside, and whisper, "One day at a time, sweetheart." And that's what Emily did. One day at a time. She started therapy, hesitant at first, but desperate for understanding. The therapist's office was calm, filled with soft light and quiet music. There, for the first time, she spoke freely. about the rooftop night, the broken mirror, the anger, the guilt, and the fear. Not of Ryan, but of losing herself completely. Her therapist told her something that stayed with her. You can love someone deeply and still need to walk away. Love isn't measured by how much pain you can endure. That sentence became her anchor. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, the world began to feel less heavy. She took walks through the park, rediscovered her love for painting, and reconnected with old friends she hadn't seen in years. Every small moment of laughter felt like a tiny victory, proof that she could feel happiness again without guilt. There were nights when the memories returned, the sound of Ryan's voice, the way he used to hold her, the echo of promises that would never come true. But instead of fighting them, she learned to let them pass through her. Healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about forgiving, not him, but herself. One afternoon, about a year later, Emily sat in a small cafe near the edge of town, sketching idly on a napkin. She wasn't expecting anyone, but then a stranger's voice broke through her thoughts. "Hi," he said with a shy smile. "I couldn't help but notice your drawing." "Mind if I sit?" She hesitated. Then she smiled faintly. "Sure." They talked for hours. Not about love or pain or the past, but about simple things. Music, travel. The way coffee always tastes better on cloudy days. There was no spark, no fireworks, just warmth. And for Emily, that was enough. When she left the cafe, she realized something. She hadn't thought about Ryan once that entire afternoon. That night, she stood by her window, watching the moonlight fall across the floor. The house was quiet again, but this time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. She picked up her old wedding ring from the drawer. The gold had dulled, but the memories it carried were still sharp. She smiled sadly, then placed it back, not as a symbol of what she lost, but as a reminder of what she survived. In therapy the next week, her therapist asked, "Do you ever think about what you'd say to him if you could?" Emily thought for a long time, then nodded. "Yes," she said softly. "I'd tell him I hope he's okay. I don't hate him. I just finally learned that saving someone else shouldn't mean losing yourself." For the first time in years, she meant every word. By spring, Emily had started teaching art classes at a local community center. She loved watching people create, seeing color return to blank pages the same way it had slowly returned to her life. One day, while cleaning up after class, she noticed a little girl struggling with a drawing. The girl frowned and said, "It doesn't look like what I wanted." Emily smiled. Sometimes, the best pictures are the ones that don't go as planned. The girl looked up. "Really?" "Really," Emily said gently, "because they show us something we didn't know we needed to see." The girl smiled, and in that small, innocent smile, Emily saw a reflection of her own healing. That night, she drove home under a sky scattered with stars. For the first time in a long time, she rolled the windows down and let the wind wash over her face. She laughed, not because everything was perfect, but because she was finally free. Free to breathe, free to hope, free to live again. And though a part of her heart would always carry the ghost of Ryan's memory, she no longer felt haunted. She felt human, whole. Because sometimes, the most powerful kind of love is learning how to love yourself after being broken. Chapter 8. The Lesson That Stayed. Time passed quietly, the way seasons change when you're not keeping count. Emily no longer marked days by heartbreak or healing. She just lived, and that, in itself, was a miracle. Her story wasn't one of tragedy anymore. It was one of transformation. Every so often, she'd look back, not with anger, not with regret, but with understanding. She saw now that what she and Ryan had wasn't a failure. It was a chapter, a difficult, painful, but necessary chapter that taught her what love truly meant. Because love, she realized, isn't about rescuing someone. It's about walking beside them and knowing when the path must split for both to survive. In the years that followed, Emily's life filled with small, beautiful moments she once thought she'd never have again. Mornings where she woke without dread, evenings spent painting until midnight, music filling the room instead of silence. She learned to savor peace, that quiet, steady kind of peace that doesn't need to be loud to feel real. People who met her now wouldn't have guessed the storm she'd lived through, but every brushstroke, every word she spoke in her art classes carried a trace of it, the strength that comes only after breaking. One day, while cleaning her studio, she found an old box of photos from her wedding. The beach, the sunset, the promise. For a long moment, she just stared, not crying, not smiling, just remembering. Then she whispered, "Thank you," and put them away. Not thank you, because it was easy, but thank you, because it made her who she was. She had once believed that love was about holding on. Now, she knew it was just as much about letting go. And for anyone who heard her story, anyone standing where she once stood, trying to love someone who couldn't love themselves, Emily wanted them to know this. You are not selfish for saving yourself. You are not weak for walking away. And you are not broken for surviving something that tried to break you. Love isn't supposed to hurt. It's supposed to heal. And sometimes, the first person you have to save is you. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, Emily stepped outside her studio, wiping paint from her hands. The air was warm, the sky painted in soft golds and pinks, the same colors that once lit the beach where everything began. But this time, there was no illusion, no fairy tale, just life, simple, honest, and hers. She smiled, closed her eyes, and whispered to the wind, "What's real is always worth fighting for." And with that, Emily walked back inside, ready to begin her next painting, not of pain, not of loss, but of everything that came after.